I subjected myself to the entirety of Monster the Ed Gein story on Netflix this past weekend, and I have a lot of thoughts specifically on the term creative liberties. Because I understand for a story like this, you need to take creative liberties to actually make a full story because there's gaps in there. You need to try to fill it in as best you can. But some of the choices that this show made felt incredibly unnecessary and at times just absolutely disgusting. The one that really stuck out to me as I've looked into Ed Gein's story more, and by looking into it, I mean I made a few Google searches and watched a few YouTube videos, is the whole storyline with Bernice. Bernice is one of the only two confirmed unalives throughout Ed Gein's entire reign of terror. And the fact that they decided to add a whole subplot where he had a romantic relationship with her felt very, very gross to me. As far as we know, there is no proof of that at all. But they decided to take a person who was unalived by this person in a dramatization. They decide to add sequences where they have very graphic sex and they're like exchanging women's lingerie with each other. I'm just thinking like if I had a relative who was, involved in something like this and then there's a dramatization about it where there's no proof of any kind of relationship like that and then on screen they're showing the killer having sex with this relative of mine, I would feel very, very gross about this. And I don't understand how the creator of this felt good about that. It's just the more I think about this show and the more I look into like the actual real events or like supposedly true events of what actually happened, the more I feel weird about it and the more I just feel like this show is very, very distasteful. And it's not even from the actual Ed Gein stuff. I understood going into it that Ed Gein is a very gross person and I don't have poor taste or I'm not like very, nauseous or anything like that to gore. I understood what I was getting myself into and I was very intrigued to hear about this guy's story. But then they add all these storylines with actual people. It really just defeats the whole fact of him being a loner. Apparently, he was a loner, and that's why he did all this stuff. But then apparently, he has a relationship with this older woman that he unalives. He has this crazy girlfriend who apparently tells him to do all this crazy stuff. This all just makes no sense. And speaking of Adeline, I understand for this, some of her whole storyline is supposed to just be like hallucinations. And I understood there are some moments that I was watching where I was like, oh yeah, that's probably just hallucination. But there were still points where we have an entire storyline with her going to New York, which was completely unnecessary. I don't understand. It just all made no sense. Like I understand with him, he's a very, very sick person, so there's going to be hallucinations, and I could tell watching the show where the hallucinations were. But then there are points where having that be a hallucination made no sense. But it's also they're using the hallucinations as an excuse to just add this stuff just for the sake of adding stuff and buffing up the runtime. The show is just very, very gross to me. Not even the fact of the subject matter, of the fact of like just blatant misrepresentation of people and actual people's lives. I understand it's a dramatization. There's going to be the buzzwords that people use to excuse this kind of stuff, but I just don't get it. I do have one quick positive I want to say. I do think it was very interesting how they're interweaving those storylines behind the making of Psycho, Texas Chainsaw, and Silence of the Lambs and how it was related to Ed. I thought that was a very interesting aspect of it, like adding the influences of Ed as he's going through his whole life at the same time. And the Anthony Perkins stuff was cool. The Hitchcock stuff could have been better if they just casted somebody better. The Leatherface stuff was interesting, and again, the Silence of the Lamb stuff was also very interesting. But then at the same time, again, they will then go back to Ed and use Ed with other people by doing things like the chainsaw chase down of those two hunters. They recreated the psycho scene with Adeline's character in like episode 3. And then we understand that's a hallucination, but that makes no sense for being a hallucination from Ed because it's from a movie scene. So they're just trying to use Ed Gein's face and putting them into the movies just for the sake of being like, oh, look at this thing. Look at the screen. Be like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. It all just, again, just felt gross. And I wasn't even grossed out by the actual Ed Gein crazy stuff in his house. I didn't watch the Mendez one. I watched the Dahmer one. I didn't feel as gross about the Dahmer one, but I also didn't look that much into it. But I understand there's probably just as much bad stuff with that too. This just feels like just continuing to overly fetishize true crime and actual people's lives that were affected by this. And again, I just feel like it is just absolutely disgusting. All I gotta say is that if you're gonna actually tell the story, just tell the story. We don't need all this other random BS that doesn't make sense and is not important at all.